I'm so scared. We have to be so quiet. This place is known to be haunted at Paris. It's currently 11 p.m. in Paris. We're gonna look at all the dark stories. Even the lights are flickering in the subway station. Donc, allons-y. We just got off the subway, Cité, because we're on Île de la Cité, which is the heart of Paris. And is it the city of love or the city of darkness? Let's go find out at our first spot. Why is Paris called the city of love? Pourquoi c'est la ville de l'amour? Juste derrière moi, right behind me, I have a statue of a woman called Eloise. Et à droite, il y a une statue of a man called Abélard. We are in the 12th century, and Eloise is right now 16 years old. She's rich because her uncle, her tutor, is an important chanoine, which is like a pope and a very wealthy person at the time. His name is Fulbert. So he had very strict religious education for his niece, and he wanted to really find the best of the best pour l'éducation. So he found a famous educator who was called Abélard. Abélard was 32 years old, and he was a theology teacher and a mathématicien. And this doesn't help the fact that they meet, and of course, they fall madly in love. Ils tombent amoureux. But the problem is in their love story, she falls pregnant. So this is a catastrophe because at the time she was 16, she's from a religious background, she's a chanoine's niece, and so they were terrified and they had to hide that she was pregnant for as long as they could. But then it reached the point where they couldn't hide it anymore. So they took everything they had and crossed all the fronts. At the time, the furthest they could get to was Bretagne. So there they were able to get married with fake names so she could give birth legally to a little boy called Astrobot. So of course, one day when Fulbert wanted to go visit his niece, he found out she was gone. And also, suspiciously, the teacher next door was also missing. He heard lots of gossips. Il a entendu des rumeurs. He lost his mind. So he put his trust in an educated man, a religious man, that got her pregnant and kidnapped her. But it was the worst humiliation for him. La pire humiliation. Because he was the French Pope after all. So this was a complete insult to his reputation. And so he wanted to clear his name and take his revenge. So he went to pay a lot of church guys that were working for him to find Eloise and Abélard. They arrived in a village and eventually Eloise opened the door. He was so mad at Abélard that he wanted a much worse punishment to him. And what type of worse punishment could you do to a man at this time? I'll let you guess. Oui, il était castré. Yes, he was castrated. So this was a humiliation for a man at the time, but it was a humiliation towards their love story because it meant that they could have no more children. And he forced Abélard into a monastery in Brittany, en Bretagne, and made him into a monk, while he brought Eloise to Champagne. She was forced into a convent to become a nun. The kid was given to the parents of Abélard, so there was no more love story. No, of course not. They were madly in love. Ils étaient fous amoureux. So while they were in the monastery, they wrote each other love letters. And it's for this reason today that they are the most famous love story couples in all of the French history books. Why they have statues behind me is because of these love letters. Ces lettres d'amour. It was like poetry. They wrote to each other for 10 long years until the day that Abélard died. Eloise was devastated. She asked his body could be moved to Champagne, but it didn't, and she had another 10 years of pure sadness. Her last wish was to be buried with her lover. So when they opened the coffin of Abélard, he had his arms spread out open, the legend says, and when they put her corpse inside, they hugged. Ils se sont embrassés. They are now buried in a famous cemetery, Père Lachaise. So one of the most famous love stories, Histoire d'amour, in Paris of all time, is not much of a histoire d'amour. And that brings us on to the next spot, which you just need to walk down the steps on the left from the house right there. And now we're in an area called Rue des Ursins. So now we're in the corner of the street of Rue des Ursins on my left and Rue des Chandres. And just being here feels quite creepy. But not too far from here is an ancient hospital called Hôtel Dieu. It's a very, very famous hospital because it's where there were a lot of soldiers and patients that were treated. At this period of time, the beginning of the 20th century, there were a lot of orphans. And so there was not enough space in Hôtel Dieu to keep them. And some of them were put right in the window that you can see behind me in the bars. They were put there. That's the place that they found to put the orphans, and that's the window of their bedroom. So as you can tell, it's very dark and very small and very low in the ground. So being an orphan and being a child at this time wasn't very pleasant. There were bars, it was dark, it was very narrow, and it's crazy to think that they put 50 orphans in there. 50. The thing is that they were supervised during the day, but there wasn't space for the supervisors. So in the evenings, the supervisors would go back to Hôtel Dieu or go back to their home. So they were left alone during the evenings from 8 p.m. So at 8 p.m., they were supposed to go to sleep, aller dormir, and be locked and left alone. Right behind me, we can see another sign that says January 1910. So right now, nous sommes at January 1910. And January 1910 is a special period in Paris time because it was when something terrible happened. It was when there were the worst floods at Paris. You can do a lot of research about it. You can see a lot of photos about it because it was this time in Paris where people were on boats. It lasted like 3 months and it was a really crazy time. So anyways, we're back to January 1910 and we are with the children behind me. And the children are all sleeping. So it's way after 8 p.m. It's around midnight and something terrible is going to happen. There's a clue in the street. If you look carefully, you can see that it says Rue Janvier 1910, which means the flooding period of this time. And you can see signs of water that is still there, that was there from the time. And so what would have happened to these kids? Yeah, the clue is right there. January 1910, meaning the flood, right? The very famous flood of Paris. So that sign that says Rue Janvier 1910 is the level that the water reached. So people had to use boats, and suddenly that night, in the middle of the night, where the orphans are behind me, water is going through the window. So the water is rushing through the window and the kids are starting to notice it and they're screaming for help. Water is going higher and higher really fast. And Parisians that were really escaping really fast around here heard the screams. They couldn't do anything because they were escaping and because there was nowhere of going down there because the flood was already really bad. So witnesses from those floods were later interviewed later on by local radio stations, and they said un des pires sons qu'ils ont jamais entendu, one of the worst sounds they ever heard, because hearing those screams were absolutely horrible. And as I'm saying this story, I'm actually quite creeped out because it inspired a very famous ghost story that's still actual today. And they say that like around midnight, which is around the time that we're shooting this and that we're here now, we can sometimes hear the screams at night. And that people a few weeks later, a few months later, said that they would pass here around midnight and they would like hear kids' screams. And it's still actual today. Like you can still find people on TikTok posting about this. So this place is known to be haunted at Paris. And right behind me, wow, I'm so scared. Right behind me, there is actually like the form of a child on the wall. And it's like to represent the soul of a dead child because this place is known to be haunted, and it's also to remember them. But this is one of the most haunted places in Paris that we are in today. Donc, let's go to the next one. So after that sad but really haunting story, we are in Rue des Chantres. Yeah, it's midnight, it's very quiet, and I just wanted to kind of put you guys in the context of how it was at the time, because now you walk in the street and you're like, wow, the old buildings, the medieval buildings, and we can see Notre-Dame, and it must have been great. But the thing is, you have to put it into context. You have to think that at this time, it was the Middle Ages, so everything was filthy. Like, people were throwing out their feces in the streets with buckets, and everything stank so much. You had like the poo up to your ankles, you had like noises, it smelled like blood. Cité horrible. It was a very disgusting time. And they later on, dealt with this and said that they had to tell people that they would throw the feces down. They would have to like shout out like, we're gonna throw it, we're gonna throw it. And also that later on they threw it in the Seine, which is why I didn't walk in the Seine. But to give you a context, that the Middle Ages were really a time of like filth, plague, smells. And we're going on to our right, onto the next spot, which is very close, very nearby, and c'est une brasserie et un restaurant connu. It's now a famous like restaurant, very renowned, but we're gonna talk about what it was at the time. So, j'ai allumé le flash. I turn on the flash because on voit rien. I can't see anything. We're right now in la rue Chanoinaise, which means the Cannon Street. Chanoinaise is a religious group of people. And actually, from the first story, the uncle of Eloise, Hubert, lived in this street too. So it used to be a very, very lively street. Like, there were students coming from all over France, and they were coming from all over Europe. They were coming to become apprentices so they could learn. So it was right behind me, you can see it says Au Vieux Paris, which is still a restaurant today, but we're too late now, so the lights are off. But it's actually a very, very famous restaurant. C'est un restaurant très, très connu. It was one of the oldest restaurants à Paris. C'était un des plus vieux. So in the 15th century, something was very strange, is that people were reportedly missing from this area. It was very mysterious and suspicious, but at the time it was not that uncommon, so not many people asked many questions. But one time there was a German boy. So he traveled from very far from Germany all the way to here in Paris to become an apprentice. And he had a little dog. His name was Alaric. And he had a very long trip, because going from all the way over there to here at the time, ça prenait beaucoup de temps. It took so much time. He had a very long beard and long hair. So he saw this barber shop and he was so surprised, because he thought, wow, I haven't seen so many. J'en ai pas trop vu. Because at the time, I'm not sure in Germany, but probably il y en avait pas tant que ça. There wasn't that many barbershops there, and it was just not a common thing. So he thought, after such a long trip, why don't I just cut my beard and cut my hair? So the only thing he needed to do was to tie his little dog before he went inside. So he just found one of the poles that were here, and he tied his little dog and went inside the barbershop. But he doesn't seem to go out again. But this time, something was different from all those reportedly missing people, because there was the little dog. The little dog started barking and barking and barking very loudly. So the neighbors came out, and then other people came out, and they were all wondering, where is this dog's owner? Like, why is no one picking him up? Why is he with a leash here? So they started asking questions. So there were bothered neighbors, angry neighbors, and they wondered where there was the owner. The dog is hysterical. And he got the attention of the policemen. Of course, they're not the modern policemen that we know today, but they also started asking questions, and they wanted to know what was happening. Like, where is the owner? So a neighbor said he saw a guy with a long beard tie his dog and go into the barbershop. So they went to the barbershop and asked him about this. And the barbershop said, yeah, he came, He paid and he left. But the policemen weren't fools and they didn't need a warrant at the time to look all over someone's home. So they went in et ils ont tout fouillé, tout cherché. So they looked at every corner. Eventually they asked to go into the basement. And guess who they found? They found Alaric. But Alaric had his hands tied and his stomach open with his guts out. So just to say that Alaric never left the barber shop because the barber had done that to him. And in a way, this wasn't so surprising in the Middle Ages. But the thing is that the organs and the bloods of Alaric were like spilling into the room and they were leading into another tunnel. So they went dans ce tunnel, they went into this other tunnel and they saw that it led into another basement. But not just any basement. It led into the restaurant right beside, dans le restaurant juste à côté. So they were thinking, and they opened that basement, and guess what they found? They found a lot of bodies. So the police thought that the barber and the baker were more than just friendly neighbors. And wait a minute. So the pies had a secret ingredient all along: fresh and free meat. So actually, they killed people in the area and made pies with their intestines and their organs. Ew. They were sentenced to death, of course, because doing such crimes, you were sentenced to death. But what was calculated was so crazy was that during this time, they killed 300 people on the street. Mysteriously, that people had no idea where they went. And so honestly, it's thanks to that little dog. And a lot of stories and a lot of operas were inspired from this crazy story. And also a very famous movie by Tim Burton called Sweeney Todd with Johnny Depp, which I don't know if you've seen. I haven't yet. But after this story, I kind of do. But I'm not sure if I want to try les tourtes, the meaty pies. So now we're living the street of Rue Chanoinaise with the very delicious meaty pies. And we're going to one of the most famous monuments, which is going to reopen very soon. I think you can guess which one it is, to talk a little bit about its scary architecture. Maintenant, we are at Notre-Dame, Our Lady, and she's going to reopen very soon, va ouvrir très bientôt. But today we're going to talk about the legends that turn around the devil at Notre-Dame. So as we can see, there are a lot of dark sculptures on this building. So on peut voir les gargouilles, the gargoyles that are sitting over there, watching over Paris and over the doors as well, which is something not many people know, is that the architecture of the doors are very special because the oldest legend is around the doors, les portes, and there's a mystery. So it was built in 1163 and it was done in 1345, the Notre-Dame. So it took 200 years of construction, 200 ans de construction. So you can tell that they were very happy to open the Notre-Dame and people were very excited. And now we're in 1345. So there only needed to be one final thing, une dernière chose, the ornaments to go on the doors. So they needed to find the most talented blacksmith de Paris, of Paris, and this blacksmith's name was Biscornet. So he was able to make these ornaments so fast and so magnificent in one night. And people found that very amazing, very successful, but also very strange. People started wondering how this blacksmith made all of this in one night, and they started suspecting that he received the visit of the devil. So that they made a pact, and at night he sold his soul for the devil for fame and success. In exchange, the devil would be forever on the doors of Notre-Dame, forever on God's doors. This is a mystery till today because they've studied it and they can't explain how he made it. They didn't have the technology and materials to bend the iron the way he did and to make it the way that he made it. So it remains a mystère, a big mystery, and most people think it's related to him making a deal avec le diable, with the devil. So people are being jailed during the French Revolution during this time. There were many prisoners, but the most famous prisoner of all was Marie Antoinette herself, the Queen of France. She was in Versailles right before coming here, which was probably the most luxurious home and place that you could live in France. And she cried there every night. Elle pleurait tous les soirs. And she was jailed for 76 days. Elle était en prison pendant 76 jours. And people could go pay to see her, like to see how she was, just like an animal in the zoo. Then, after those days, she was released to go to trial and represented by two very famous lawyers. But we all know how that ends. She was executed on Place de la Concorde, which used to be called Place de la Révolution. And just across from me, de l'autre côté du pont, across the bridge, is Place de Châtelet. So it was one of the many squares where people were executed, where people died. And at the time, ils étaient pas très sympas. They were not so great. They died in very painful, horrible ways. Like they died through boiling people to death. They died on the wheels, on planks, horrible, long, bad deaths. During the French Revolution, thousands of people needed to be executed. And of course, these were very slow, painful deaths, but it reached a point where there were too many people to execution. So there was a doctor, il y avait un docteur, that was concerned for these people and these prisoners, saying that they deserved to die in a way that was quick and painless and efficient. Whether you were rich or poor, you had to confront death the same way, in a very fast way. The name of this doctor was Dr. Guillotin. So yes, he invented la guillotine. The guillotine ended up being able to kill between 50 people to 100 people per day. So much more efficient and much more painless. And it's crazy because the first time that they used the guillotine was right on that square in front of Hôtel de Ville in Paris. There was a lot of people to watch the first time that they did la guillotine. And guess what one person said when they did it the first time? He said, too fast, trop vite. The death was too fast. It was too fast for him. And with these charming bedtime night stories, I wish you un joyeux Halloween, a happy Halloween. It was my first time doing a walk like this au milieu de Paris à minuit. It was very creepy, very scary, but I have so many more stories about different parts of Paris. Let me know if you're interested to know about the others, si t'es intéressé pour connaître les autres. If you like this video, definitely comment. I will make sure to read it and reply to you. I hope you enjoyed these stories de l'histoire de Paris. Moi, j'ai adoré faire cette vidéo. I loved making this video, and I hope that it gives you some thought about, sometimes a city is not what we always think. I'll be sharing a recap sur mon Instagram, on my personal Instagram, if you want to go ahead and follow that. And let me know in the comments what other sort of video que tu voudrais voir de Paris, that you would love to see of Paris. I post every day on TikTok, on Instagram, and every week sur YouTube. Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much. Et fais des beaux rêves. Have some sweet dreams.